All right, ladies and gentlemen, you are locked on Falcons. I'm your host, Aaron Freeman, and today I'm giving you my rapid reaction to the Falcons 43-3 beatdown at the hands of the Dallas Cowboys in Week 10.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So, guys, you know me. I'm Aaron Freeman. Been covering the Falcons for many years, formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP. Still going strong on Twitter at FalcFans. Putting up weekly content over at the SB Nation website for the Atlanta Falcons. That is the Falcoholic.com. And, of course, the host of this illustrious Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And on today's episode, we will be giving you my rapid reaction to the Falcons' Week 10 loss to the Dallas Cowboys by a score of 43-3. We'll be breaking down the game summary, what went wrong for the Falcons. Normally I would say what went right, but not much went right for the Falcons. Give out some game grades. Lowest graded game for me for this team so far this season. And we'll get some final thoughts at the end of today's episode, talking about the direction of the team, not only given the short week coming up on Thursday night against the New England Patriots, as well as the sort of bigger picture, taking a step back and looking at the general direction of this team moving forward. So we'll get into all of that on today's episode. But before we do, I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Falcons your first listen each and every day. Of course, Locked On Falcons is free and available on a variety of podcast platforms, including Apple, Odyssey, Google, and Spotify, as well as now on YouTube. Make sure you go subscribe to the Locked On Falcons YouTube page. And when you check us out, make sure you leave a comment, make sure you leave a like, and all that jazz. So jumping right into the game, things didn't start off too poorly for the Falcons. It looked like they were going to make this a game. Obviously the Cowboys went down the field immediately and scored 7 points on their opening possession, but that's pretty much par for the course whenever the Falcons face a decent offense this year. Then they followed that up with 3 points of their own. They couldn't get a catch from Russell Gage in traffic on a third down pass with the ball hitting the ground, and the Falcons had to settle for Younghoe Koo kicking a 35-yard field goal, and that made the score 7-3 at that point in time. And then the Falcons actually got a stop. They were able to force a punt in Dallas with Zeke Elliott dropping a third down pass, and then you saw what was the beginnings of a good drive, starting off with Kyle Pitts. He had a good start to this game. He had 3 catches for 52 yards combined on the first 2 possessions of the game. You also saw positive plays for Cordero Patterson getting a good start, having 34 combined yards on 4 touches on those first 2 drives. But then on that second drive, the Falcons went to Kyle Pitts again, and Cowboys nickel cornerback Jordan Lewis was there to break up the pass on the 3rd and 7, and the Falcons decided to go for it on 4th and 7, and Arthur Smith got aggressive, and Jordan Lewis showed up again and broke up the pass on to Russell Gage on that 4th down play. And this was kind of the point in the game where it was pretty much over for the Falcons. They would never really show much of anything after this point in time. And I'm not going to sit here and do what the broadcast team did and suggest that this was the sort of the turning point in the game. The Falcons clearly had plenty of other opportunities later in this game to get back into the game. But this would basically be the last time that they were actually in the game. So as for the decision to go for it on 4th down, I certainly questioned it in the moment. I certainly think, given the lack of execution, it's fair to question it after the moment. I'm sure analytics will say that it was the right call for Arthur Smith, and I could see that from a certain standpoint. I looked it up after the game, and you go back and look at all the 4th and 7s over the last 5+ years, going back to 2016, and teams convert about 43% of the time. And they were looking at a 49-yard field goal from Younghoe Koo, which isn't automatic, but given that Koo is basically 5 for 5 in his over the last 3 years from that distance, and the Cowboy Stadium is a pretty kicker-friendly environment. I think kickers collectively are about like 4 for 5 or 5 for 6 from that distance over the last 3 years in that stadium. You would assume that this was pretty much an automatic 3 points for the Falcons. But if you do the math and you say, okay, if the 43% chance of converting on a 4th and 7 by going for it, and that leads to 7 points, it's 43% chance of 7 points, roughly is about 3 points. And if it's 100% chance or 99% chance of 3 points on the field goal, 3 points, roughly the analytics would, I guess, suggest that if that's how these fourth down calculators work, that's how I assume they do. I don't know, but you would say it's a wash, right? And so going for it was just as likely to net you the same amount of points as kicking the field goal. So it makes sense to go for it, to be aggressive in that situation. And it was interesting when you look at the teams, when looking it up, the teams that went for it on 4th and 7 in the first quarter, which wasn't frequent. Only about 12 out of like the 106 attempts came in the first quarter over the last 5+ years. And those 12 times, teams converted, I think, like 70% of the time or 69% of the time or whatever it was. But only one of those teams was at the field position that went for it, where they had to kick a field goal under 50 yards in that situation, like the Falcons found themselves in. And so typically when teams went for it early in the game on a 4th and 7, it was because they were likely going to have to kick a 54-yard field goal or 60-yard field goal, which is far from automatic at that point in time. But 49 seems pretty automatic based off of Koo's history or whatever the case may be. So while I think it's more than fair to question the decision that the Falcons decided to go for it, I'm not going to really make a mountain out of a molehill. Obviously, I've spent a good little while talking about it because I kind of definitively want to have my take on it. But I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, Arthur Smith is bad at game management and he cost us the game or anything like that. I just think, it's going to be something that is going to get discussed and debated quite a bit. And I think it's worthy of discussion and debate, but it's not, to me, this sort of huge deal that like decided the fate of the game or is something that we need to worry about for the future of this team. It's one play. It didn't go the Falcons' way. It is what it is. You just kind of have to move on. But with that favorable field position that the Falcons got after that failed conversion, the Cowboys went for their own 4th and 5 in scoring position. They would have wound up kicking a 50-yard field goal at that point. They got aggressive. They went for it. And CeeDee Lamb, showed why they had confidence in going for it. He beat Avery Williams on a 21-yard gain. Then a few plays later, Dallas scored from the 1-yard line on a Zeke Elliott run, and that pushed their lead 14-3. They would then score again on their next possession, also in converting a 4th down, this time a 4th and 3. Again, they had an opportunity to settle for 3 points, going for a 42-yard field goal at that point in time. But Michael Gallup, in his first game back after injury, got a 23-yard gain on that particular play, finding a soft spot in the Falcons cover 2 zone, as so many receivers and tight ends have found this season. And then the next play, Zeke punched it in from the 2-yard line, and the Cowboys had a 21-3 lead with 8 minutes to go in the first half. And then the Falcons had their second consecutive 3-and-out, ending with Dorrance Armstrong beating Jalen Mayfield for a sack. Dallas then marched the ball down the field again. Lamb beating Williams in the end zone for a 9-yard touchdown pass, giving Dallas the dreaded 28-3 lead with 1 minute left in the first half. And you would assume, okay, the Falcons maybe have enough time to march down the field, get a field goal, with them getting the ball at the start of the second half, maybe go down the field, get a touchdown. Again, they still have a huge hole to dig out of at this point in time, 28-3. But, if they can come out and get like 10 points on these next 2 possessions, it's a 2-score game and they'll have a chance in the second half. So, of course, first down, Falcons give up a sack. This time, Caleb McGarry basically got juked by Micah Parsons. Matt Ryan fumbles the football. Fortunately, the Falcons recover it. Then on second down, Anthony Brown breaks up a pass to Olamide Zaccheaus. Then on 3rd and 19 at this point in time, the Falcons just run a play to Mike Davis just to try to get some positive field position to punt the ball. And then the punt is blocked by Dorrance Armstrong, who got the sack 2 plays earlier. Nashawn Wright recovers the football in the end zone for a touchdown. Dallas kicks the extra point. They make it, but the Falcons get called for a too many men on the field penalty. So Dallas goes for 2 after that point, and Zeke punches it in. And now Dallas has a 36-3 lead going into halftime. And the rest of the game was pretty much the Falcons failing to make it at the least interesting. They had a 3-and-out on offense to start the half. Matt Ryan then threw a pick on the second series of the third quarter. And that was mostly on the wide receiver. In this case, Olamide Zaccheaus getting out-muscled in traffic by Anthony Brown. Then the next possession, Matt Ryan threw another interception. This time he had pressure in his face. But this one, I think, was on the quarterback because even though he had that pressure in his face, he threw high and behind Kyle Pitts, and it was picked off by Trayvon Diggs. You still got to make those throws. You're going to find pressure in this league. We've seen Matt Ryan make these throws with pressure in his face. So that, to me, is on the quarterback as well as the offensive line to a certain degree. And then after that point, the third quarter ended and the Falcons pulled their starters, put Josh Rosen in the game. Wayne Gallman basically was running out the clock. I think 48 of his team leading 55 yards came in after that point in the fourth quarter. Rosen himself threw an interception to start the fourth quarter on a miscommunication to Kyle Pitts, where that ball was tipped by Anthony Brown, picked off by Jordan Lewis. Anthony Brown and Jordan Lewis played the games of their lives. They look like superstars in this game. Dallas got their final score right before that Josh Rosen interception, where the Falcons put their backups in the game. They had a methodical drive. They had a couple of penalties on that drive that pushed them back, but still were able to keep moving the chains despite that, giving the Falcons defense some help with those penalties. The defense couldn't get any stops, and Dak ultimately ran it in on a 4-yard rollout on a scramble and kind of outmuscled Michael Walker at the goal line to get that 43rd score. So that's essentially a game summary. Not a whole lot to write home about in the second half, and we'll get into the grades. And spoiler alert, they're not going to be great as we continue today's Locked On Falcons podcast. But whether the Falcons disappointing you is a familiar outcome, let's talk about another familiar outcome. You're watching the game on one device. You're trying to catch your streams of your favorite shows on another one. You're watching sports highlights on your phone. And then you got your father's, brothers, nephews, cousins, former roommate Deborah's login for your preferred streaming service. Well, I want to tell you about a way to get all the entertainment that you love simply without any of the hassle, and a great way to finally get your TV together, and it's called DirecTV Stream. It brings your live TV and on-demand favorites together like never before, so you can watch your favorite sports, movies, and shows all in one place. That means no more juggling remotes, never having to buy another device ever again. And the best part, besides not having to borrow Deborah's login, is there's no annual contract. So get rid of the clutter and the confusion and get your TV together with DirecTV Stream. You can learn more at directtv.com. That's directtv.com. Compatible device required. Content varies by package. So getting into the Falcons game grades, as we do each and every Sunday on this rapid reaction, giving out grades for the passing offense, rushing offense, passing defense, rushing defense, as well as special teams. Starting with the passing offense, D-. I don't feel like giving an F is fair, but feels like I give him the worst possible grade without giving him an F. This was a rough game for Matt Ryan. I don't think he was terrible or anything, but it certainly fits in that category of games that he's had quite a few of this year, which is pretty meh performances. I feel like he's had 4 up to this point, now 5 with this Dallas game. And then you contrast that with 4 really, really good games where he played outstanding in those games. As I said earlier, that first pick was on Zaccheaus. The second one, I think, was on the quarterback, even with pressure in his face. You look at the weapons, Kyle Pitts was cooking early in this game. Again, had 3 catches for 52 yards on basically the Falcons' first 6 or 7 plays or whatever it was, and then had 1 catch for 8 yards the rest of the game. The Falcons wide receivers had a combined 1 catch on 6 targets for 0 yards in the first half of this game. Pitts got no help. Patterson got no help. That lone catch in the first half was Tajay Sharp on a rollout, which was basically a check down at that point in time. Zaccheaus finished the game with 2 catches for 22 yards. Russell Gage was once again, for the 3rd time this season, blanked with 0 catches on 3 targets. We got a big week from this wide receiver group last week. They, stunk the bed, let's say that, to not use colorful terms. And so whether it's Marvin Hall, whether it's Calvin Ridley moving forward, hopefully somebody's going to come in and help this unit and give this offense a shot in the arm. You then couple that with Hayden Hurst injuring his ankle late in the game where he got rolled up on. So you wonder about his status moving forward. This Falcons passing attack, we'll get later in the episode talk about, needing to have weapons around Matt Ryan. But certainly did not look the part this week, and we'll see if they look the part, on Thursday. More on that later. But, the offensive line in terms of their performance was not great, but, we went into this game feeling pretty confident. Okay, the offensive line will hold up well. Dallas's pass rush won't be a huge factor because Randy Gregory's now out for a while, won't play in this game. I don't think Dallas was dominant up front by any means, but they did get some pressure, and it seemed like when they got pressure, it counted, whether it was sacks or a hit on the quarterback. They finished the game with 2 sacks, 5 quarterback hits. That seems like a pretty typical stat line for an NFL offense of line, in today's NFL. So it's hard for me to be too harsh on the offensive line and say, oh, they played poorly. Maybe the film will suggest otherwise, but it just for whatever reason, whether it was the offensive line, the quarterback, or the running game, or the weapons, the Falcons offense didn't have it. And speaking of the running game, I give that unit a D. As I said, Gallman was eating, padding stats in garbage time late in the game. Falcons finished the game with 103 rushing yards, and most of that came in garbage time. It's hard to figure out exactly when garbage time started. Was it the third quarter? Was it, the fourth quarter? Whatever the case may be, because the Falcons were still kind of running the ball in the third quarter, trying to balance their offense midway through the third quarter. But you wonder if that was because they just didn't want to put the offensive line in a situation where Cowboys defensive line could just pin their ears back and get after Matt Ryan at that point in time. That's why they were running it, or they were just simply trying to shorten the game, and basically at that point when it was 36-3, be like, look, we're not winning this game. We might as well just shorten the game and get out of here as quickly as possible. So I don't know. If you don't count the third quarter, you're looking at the Falcons rushing success. They had 31 yards on 11 carries in the first half. So a success rate of 18% on those 11 carries. And last week we gave the Falcons rushing attack an F grade when they had a success rate of 10% on 20 carries. If you look at their success rate in the third quarter, they did a little bit better, 60% on 5 carries. So that pads things out. So if you don't want to count that as garbage time, that, boosts the numbers a little bit. So it's not nearly as bad. But it's hard to give them too much credit, when they're down 30 points and they're finding some success rushing the football at that point in time. So I went with a D, not an F, a D. Better than last week, but not by much. Passing defense, D-. It's harder for me to be as harsh with the defense despite giving them low grades as I'm going to give them, just because we kind of knew that Dallas's offense was going to cook against this Falcons defense. Now, if you had told me, the morning of the game, oh, Dallas is going to score 43 points, I've been like, yeah, probably. That's probably what they're going to do. Now, if you had told me 36 of those will come in the first half, I would have been like, wow, yeah, that's tough. I would have thought maybe like 24 of those 43 points would have come in the first half. So certainly the defense did not play well at all. We knew our cornerbacks outside of AJ Terrell were going to be overmatched, but even he gave up a couple of receptions in this game to Michael Gallup. We knew CeeDee Lamb in the slot was going to be a major problem for this matchup. We saw a healthy mix of Avery Williams. I saw some Richie Grant early in the game as well, but it seemed predominantly Avery Williams, and, CeeDee Lamb showed why Avery Williams was considered to mostly be a special teams guy, not really a viable starting nickel cornerback. So, the good thing that you can say about Richie Grant is he did force a fumble later in this game, although, that doesn't go towards the credit of the pass defense as a run defense of issue. He forced a fumble on Zeke Elliott in the third quarter, but I think the Falcons immediately threw an interception right after that. So they didn't even benefit from that turnover. We didn't see much of any pressure on Dak Prescott in this game. Even though Dante Fowler was active for this game, was elevated off injured reserve on Saturday, and you thought maybe he could feast a little bit on Terrence Steele. I don't recall Dante Fowler doing anything as a pass rusher in this game. The Falcons finished with 0 sacks and 2 quarterback hits. It seemed like maybe 2 or 3 plays max where the Falcons really affected the quarterback in this game. But hey, Steven Means wasn't playing, so it's all good, as I've been told many, many times before. So moving on to the rushing defense, C-. Relatively speaking, this was the best part of the Falcons team today. They did a decent job at points in this game stopping the run. Dallas did not have a lot of success in the first quarter running the football. They did have a lot more success in the second quarter running the football. So that kind of skews the numbers a little bit. If you just look at the first quarter, the Falcons looked like they were picking up where they left off, those last 3 quarters last week where they shut down the Saints running game. Dallas only had a success rate of 29% on their 7 first quarter runs, only gained 12 yards on those 7 runs. But then in the second quarter, Dallas had a success rate of 64% on 11 runs for 34 carries. And it wasn't like they were gashing the Falcons by huge yardage. A lot of those yards, why their yards per carry was low, because a lot of those runs were short runs, but they were in short yardage situations. The Cowboys had 6 instances where they had 3 yards or less to go to convert and running the football, and they were able to convert 5 of those 6 times. And the one time they didn't, they got 2 yards on a 1st and 3 at the goal line or whatever, and then on the very next play punched it in for the score. So the Falcons did an okay job. Again, you have to sort of parse through it. Looking at sort of first downs, 1st and 10, the Falcons did a good job stopping Dallas's running game on those early downs for the most part. In the first half, Dallas only had a success rate of 33% on those 1st and 10 runs. So I can't really say the run defense was good today, but they did some good things. They certainly had one of their better days, and that made me want to give them a C grade. Because relatively speaking, this was probably like the second best day that they've had as a run defense this season. But because they got pushed around so often in short yardage and as frequent as they did, like they had given up 1 or 2 short yardage things, that's one thing. But, they basically get pushed around 5 or 6 times in short yardage is certainly not good. So I had to lower it to a C minus. So I feel like the Falcons' run defense is making some progress. Again, we're looking for the slivers of bright spots. Hey, the run defense was not terrible in a game where the Falcons lost by 40 points. So this is the only bright spot we could come up with in this game. And Grady Jarrett and Foye Oluokun were the guys that seemingly were making the majority of those plays. Oluokun did get nicked up in this game. We'll see what his status is. Darren Bates, his replacement, got nicked up in this game. AJ Terrell exited the game with seemingly a concussion, but seemed okay. But I think at that point in time, the Falcons were like, why are we going to put him back in the game? I remember a play immediately when they showed AJ Terrell on the sideline. Darren Hall gave up a big catch to, I think it was Amari Cooper that wound up setting up, I think, that last score for Dallas. Yeah, it was. So Jalen Hawkins exited the game with an ankle injury. So the Falcons got pretty beat up in this game, not only on the scoreboard, but, in terms of the injuries and whatnot. So we'll see what happens this week on a short week. That probably means that given that they have a short week and some of these guys are dealing with injuries, we might be down a couple of starters on Thursday night against the Patriots. But we'll move forward and talk about sort of what direction the team is headed in on this short week going up against the Patriots, as well as talking about some of the big picture stuff. But before we get there, I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Falcons your first listen each and every day. And as always, I have a recommendation for your second listen and several recommendations. I'm going to continue to recommend the other local shows here on the Locked On Podcast Network, devoted to the Atlanta Hawks, Atlanta Braves, as well as the Georgia Bulldogs. Locked On Hawks is available on a variety of podcast platforms, just like Locked On Bulldogs and Locked On Braves are, but Locked On Bulldogs and Locked On Braves are both also available on YouTube. So if you're watching me on YouTube, then you can go check out those shows immediately after on YouTube as well. And we'll continue today's Locked On Falcons podcast. The only bright spot for today is that coconut brownie chunk is back as a flavor for Built Bar. It was the winner of the Built Bar March Madness tourney for the best flavor, but it's only back for a limited time. So go ahead and try the best flavor of the best tasting protein bar out there on the market. And I got to say, this is 100% real, guys. This is not just doing an ad read. Coconut brownie chunk is the real deal, right? I'm a big fan of coconut. I know there's a lot of people in the Locked On group chat that we have that are not big fans of coconut, but it was good enough to convert a couple of people there and be like, maybe I'm not as anti-coconut as I want to be. So if you're a fan of coconut, I guarantee that you will love the coconut brownie chunk. If you're not a fan of coconut, there's still a decent chance that you might wind up loving it. But if not, then there's still tried and true flavors like peanut butter brownie, mint brownie, salted caramel, cookies and cream, raspberry, double chocolate, and many, many more. Regardless of the flavor that you try, Built Bars are great because they taste just like a candy bar. You get none of the guilt, though, because they're healthy since they're low in sugar, low in calories, high in protein, high in fiber. So go order yourself the coconut brownie chunk or another flavor at built.com right now, and make sure you use the promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off your first order. That's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. So we know that football season is in full swing. And of course, BetOnline is the number one spot for all the pro and college football action this season. But BetOnline is not just for football, it's for betting all your favorite sports from football, basketball, boxing, right to your favorite Vegas casino games. BetOnline is the number one spot with a new updated website and interface and even more odds, props, and contests. Head over to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today. Use the promo code Locked On, and you'll get 50% welcome bonus. That means if you deposit $500, you get $250 in free money to play with. And I know I told you guys the Falcons would probably cover this game. I've told you many times, never take my advice on a Falcons bet. Maybe you lost money on the Falcons. Maybe you made money on the Falcons or made money today. So maybe you want to make a little bit more money, or maybe you want to make up some of that lost money by checking out the Monday night game between the Rams and 49ers. The Rams favored by 3.5 points in that game. I'm not going to give you a recommendation because I don't want to give you bad advice, but head over to BetOnline however you feel about that game and check out all the amazing offers available for this season. BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts. So getting into my final thoughts of the game, my stance has always been things are never as good as you think they are. They're never as bad as they think you are. And I think, the tendency for a lot of fans, I think, is to have these wild pendulum swings. So after they lost to Carolina, it was people were very down on the Falcons. After they beat New Orleans, people were very high on the Falcons. And then now I think people are going to be down once more on the Falcons. And, I try to stay even keeled. That pendulum doesn't really swing very far for me. Basically, it swings between whether I feel like the team is a 7-win team or maybe they got a better than decent chance of being an 8-win team, right? So when they lose like they do today, I'm like, the odds went down that they're going to win 8 games. After last week, after the Saints game, I'm like, the odds went up that they might win 8 games. But I felt for a while now, going back, 3 or 4 weeks when a listener asked a question about what I think the Falcons' final record is going to be, I said then it's probably going to be 7-10. I still look at the schedule and see Detroit and Jacksonville in that second game against Carolina as 3 likely wins, and then pretty much every other game as a likely loss. Now, they certainly could steal a win here. That could happen against New England. That could happen against San Francisco. That could happen somebody else. They could also, choke against the Lions, the Jags, or Carolina. All of those things are possibilities. And I think you can't go these extreme guys where it's like the Falcons lose and well, now we got to tank for a top 5 pick, or when they win, it's like, well, we're going to run the table and we're going to go to the postseason. I just think you can't have these extremes, and they could easily beat the Patriots on Thursday, right? And then, people are going to act like the Falcons are never going to lose again. And, what I'll say about this upcoming Thursday night game is Thursday night games are weird. Right, we saw this past week with the Dolphins and Ravens. They tend to be wonky, right? They're similar to London games where you have a tendency for one team to not show up on the short week, and we've seen that time and time again over the years. So even though we sit here and if you had asked me today or you asked me 2 weeks ago, do I think the Falcons are going to beat the Patriots? No, didn't think that a month ago. Don't think that today, and certainly today's performance didn't change my opinion on that, or is unlikely to change my opinion on that. But they could easily beat this Patriots. The Patriots are not this juggernaut of a football team. They're kind of a middle rung team. And, we've seen the Falcons beat other middle rung teams like the Saints this year. So it's certainly possible that the Falcons can get their first win in Mercedes-Benz Stadium this week on a short week after this abysmal performance, because we know any given Sunday and all that sort of thing. So, the last little tidbit I'll get into to wrap up today's episode is more big picture directional stuff. And, I'm sure some of the things I'll say will get some flack. Maybe some people will jump in the comments here on YouTube. Some people will send some angry emails or go on various other platforms and complain about it. So I'm well aware that I'll get some flack from this because, some of the things I'm going to say don't fit certain narratives. But I watched this game and I felt like this is the type of game where you feel the loss of Julio Jones. And as I said back in June, Julio Jones is that stabilizing force in your offense, and you need that moving forward. And look, Matt Ryan is a good quarterback, but at this point in time in his career, more often than not, he's going to be a game manager. We've seen Matt Ryan play at a really high level, and that is not a coincidence that comes in games where you get big performances from Cordero Patterson or Kyle Pitts or whatever the case may be. And I'm not saying this to be a knock, right? Matt Ryan is the very, very best version of a game manager. I know that term is often a loaded term and used as a pejorative when it comes to quarterbacks, but to use a better analogy, if Matt Ryan was an NBA point guard, he's not a guy that's going to get you 20 and 10 every night. He's going to get you like 12 and 12, right? 12 points, 12 assists, right? He's a distributor. That's what he is, right? And you need to surround that guy on a basketball court with guys that can be spot up shooters, low post scorers, and all that various things. And it's a similar thing with football. You need weapons for him to throw to, right? Because we know Matt Ryan can get the ball in the hands of his playmakers if he's given time and he has those playmakers to have. And today he didn't have those playmakers, and that's been a through line throughout the season. The ups and downs of this Falcons offense has been coinciding with not having those playmakers. And, part of the reason why Matt Ryan gets the grief that he gets from fans and media is, he's a 12 and 12 guy, to use this basketball analogy, in an era where you have a lot of teams that, a lot of successful teams that have quarterbacks that are more 20 and 10 guys, that when they need their quarterback to go out there and make plays himself, to drive to the hoop and do all the things that we love and whatnot, and drop 25 points in a game. Those quarterbacks do that more frequently. That's not to say Matt Ryan never does that, but more frequently than Matt Ryan does. And this is kind of the problem that you have when you replace Julio Jones, that stable force, with someone like Kyle Pitts. And I'm not blaming Kyle Pitts for this loss or anything. He was, he's the type of player that can get you 30 points a night. When you have a ball distributor point guard like Matt Ryan, if whether you want to call Pitts a spot up shooter or a low post scorer or whatever the case may be, he's that guy. He's that, Matt Ryan's John Stockton, to date myself in my basketball analogies. Matt Ryan's John Stockton and Kyle Pitts is Karl Malone, I guess you could say. And so he can do that stuff, and you're going to have games where Kyle Pitts is killing it, playing at an MVP level, and then you're going to have games where Kyle Pitts is going to have like 12 points, right? He's going to go 30 one night and 12 the next night. He's going to go 40 one night and then 10 the next night, or whatever. And that's what happens with a rookie. And again, I'm not blaming this loss on Kyle Pitts, but you're going to get a lot more, ups and downs from a rookie than you were with a player like Julio Jones. And in those games where Kyle Pitts is only going to get you 12, and again, today, I think he was on the verge of getting 30, based off of his first quarter, if we're continuing this basketball analogy, but then it stopped. And one of the things I certainly want to investigate when I watch the film this week is, why did it stop? But in those games where you're only getting 12 from Kyle Pitts, you need other guys to step up. And last week, the other guys stepped up. You need 12 from Russell Gage. You need 18 from Cordero Patterson. You need, 15 from Olamide Zaccheaus, or whatever the case may be. And if you get those, you're going to have still as much success in this offense as you would with Julio Jones going off or Kyle Pitts going off and all those various things. But because those guys aren't reliable scorers, every night, to use a basketball analogy, or in football every week, you're not going to get those points. Some weeks Russell Gage is going to get you 12. Some weeks Russell Gage is going to get you 2. Right, to continue the basketball scoring analogy. So, we thought Calvin Ridley would be that sort of stabilizing force for the offense this season. That has obviously not been the case, but I think even that was questionable a little bit, because that's never really been Ridley's type of game. We think Ridley is capable of doing it, but we haven't necessarily seen Ridley go out there each and every week and give you the 6 to 7 catches to move away from the basketball stuff, to 6 or 7 catches for 80, 90 yards that we regularly got over a decade with Julio Jones. And that, again, that's why we loved Julio Jones, because he was that guy. He was that guy. If you a fan of basketball, you would go to the game each and every night. He's going to get you 30 points every night, and you're going to enjoy it. And again, I know that's when healthy, but like that's what's so weird to me. Like over the last 6 months, that narrative has shifted, that we pretended that wasn't the case for a decade, and why we loved Julio Jones. But again, this is not about Julio Jones. This is, really about that conversation that we had in June, where we were talking about you need that stabilizing force. And until the Falcons get that stabilizing foundational force in their offense week to week, they're going to have ups and downs like this. They're going to have some weeks where their offense is clicking like we've seen this year, and there's going to have some weeks where their offense is struggling like we saw today. And that's going to be the ups and downs. And I remember having this conversation where it's like, Julio, you're losing that stabilizing force that Julio is, that each and every week you're going to get X from Julio Jones. That the defense is going to entirely game plan around stopping Julio Jones. and you can build off. That's your foundation for your offense. And whether it was Julio Jones for the last decade, Michael Turner for the previous years, Vic and Dunn and Duckett in the DVD days in the past, and what that's going to be in the future, whether that's going to be Kyle Pitts, whether that's going to be Calvin Ridley, whether it's going to be another pass catcher, whether it's going to be the running game. That's what Derrick Henry was for Arthur Smith in Tennessee. And there's very few teams in the NFL, very few successful teams in the NFL that don't have that sort of foundational player. And it doesn't necessarily have to be one player, right? You could be a run-first team that has a great offensive line. You basically can have this thought process of we can put anybody behind our offensive line and he'll rush for 90 plus yards and we'll be able to run the football. That's basically when the 49ers under Kyle Shanahan have been successful. It hasn't been because they had one workhorse running back like a Derrick Henry. It's been a committee system, and it's like the system leads us to have our success when that offense has been clicking. So you can have that here in Atlanta too. So it's not to sit here and say it has to be one guy, right? But that's going to be something that the Falcons are going to have to work on. And maybe in year 2, when Kyle Pitts has had a full year under his belt, he'll be able to do that. Maybe next year, Calvin Ridley, when he's come back and whatever he's dealing with and more comfortable in the system, and the system is more comfortable with his skill set, he'll be that sort of stabilizing force. Or maybe the Falcons will be able to find, their Derrick Henry or whatever the case may be. But the Falcons are going to need to have that moving forward, particularly in the twilight of Matt Ryan's career. And again, this is not a knock on Matt Ryan, despite me not necessarily singing the praises of Matt Ryan like maybe other people on other platforms would do, as they have done often this year. I'm not knocking Matt Ryan. This is just, to me, the reality of the situation. This is just as true as Matt Ryan as it is with Drew Brees, Tom Brady, Ben Roethlisberger, Phillip Rivers, Peyton Manning, any old quarterback, any quarterback 36, 37, you have to work harder to put them in a comfortable environment, and that means putting playmakers around them. And that is true of any 36, 37-year-old quarterback compared to when they were 26 or 27 or 32 or 33 during their prime years. This is just the nature of the beast. And again, I don't have any marriages to any narratives pro or anti Matt Ryan. It's just like, this is the way it's going to be. And, when I hear Falcon fans saying like, all we just need to do is get Matt Ryan a defense, I'm like, yeah, we need to get Matt Ryan a defense and an offensive line and a running game and weapons to throw to, and, even if they had a defense, like they would have lost this game 24-3 or something like that. So like, even if you gave Matt Ryan a defense, it wouldn't have made that much of a difference in today's outcome, in my opinion. And this is kind of what I was getting at when I was discussing, this with Jeff Schultz this past Tuesday on the podcast, where it feels like the Falcons are kind of doing the same thing over again. And they're just going to have to find a balance moving forward, with their offense and their defense moving forward as they rebuild this roster and rebuild this team and hopefully have a brighter future than certainly, it looked like on Sunday. And I think, a lot of fans have convinced themselves over the years that, they couldn't find that balance because Thomas Dimitroff and Dan Quinn were complete incompetents. And now that we've hired Terry Fontenot and Arthur Smith, they're going to do it right, or whatever the case may be. And they'll be able to strike that balance. And maybe they can. But I think the reality that fans have to acknowledge, or I guess they don't have to do anything, but should acknowledge, is that, finding that balance in terms of rebuilding the offense, rebuilding the defense, and making these twilight years of Matt Ryan, whether it's 2 years, whether it's 5 years, whatever the case may be, the best possible twilight years that he can have, as we've seen with other older quarterbacks, looking at you, Drew Brees, looking at you, Tom Brady. That's a tough task, is the point. It's a tall order to find that balance. And that's not an easy job to do. And I think rather than just simply saying, oh, well, we just had to hire the right guy and they're going to do it because the other guys didn't do it, I don't think acknowledges that inherently is an uphill battle, in my opinion. And, that's a conversation that is going to be hard to completely unpack in the final 5 to 10 minutes of today's podcast. And that's going to be a conversation that it may take us 5 to 10 months to discuss, if not years, to truly unpack. And this is part of the reason why you've heard me for 6 months now on this podcast say, I am fascinated by what this regime is going to do next offseason, because they're going to have to start moving in a direction. I don't know what that direction is going to be, but trying to find that balance moving forward, as I'm fascinated to see what they do. So again, these are topics of conversation that I can't truly explore fully at the end of today's episode. So it will be something of discussion as we continue over the next days and weeks on the podcast. But tomorrow we'll be back with a guest to talk more about this game, and maybe I'll be able to, throw some of these topics and conversations and questions at that person, and they'll give their take on it on a future episode. But if you have any feedback on anything I've said or anything you want to vent a little bit about the Falcons performance, by all means, my inbox is open over at lockedonfalcons@mail.com. Of course, you can always hit me up on social media on Locked On Falcons, either on Facebook or on Twitter and on YouTube. You can leave a comment, of course. Make sure you give us a like while you do, telling me why I'm wrong or why I'm right, or what your thoughts are on this. And of course, don't ever take my advice again on a Falcons bet. Why would you? I am obligated to give my opinions on who I think you guys should bet on, but why would you take it with anything more than a grain of salt when you have places like Locked On Bets available for you? Handicapping expert Lee Sterling is giving you his daily picks, and Lee's been killing it this season, not just in terms of football, but basketball, baseball, all the sports. So don't ever listen to me when it comes to betting advice. Just subscribe to Locked On Bets, and it's free and available on a variety of podcast platforms. So go check out Locked On Bets, guys. And we'll be back tomorrow with more on this Falcon team and this loss, and how the Falcons move forward on a short week as we see what's what with this Falcon team. So appreciate it, guys. Till then.